I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read in
And
the
I'm going to talk
scripture.
about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
Remembered
invited.
at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah.
I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. I am so conservative. And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. And as always, I have to start off with our disclaimer. Just to warn people, this is not a safe space. If you don't like to have your ideas challenged, I am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. It's also true that I'm theologically conservative. And I want to know and believe what is true, and I'm willing to challenge my beliefs. So, for the viewers who have a fear of hearing an idea which they may actually lead to thinking or testing their beliefs, this is really a trigger warning. This is not a safe space for you. Today is December 8th, 2020, and this is broadcast number 218. And returning to join us today is Mark Tabladillo from Ratio Christi. Today we'll be looking at what is perspectives on world Christian movement. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher, co-host, and maybe resuming his COVID-19 reporting as a tracker is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
I don't know about that. I'm pretty much trying to put that chapter of my life behind me, the whole COVID-19 thing. Well, anyways, greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadows, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this webcast include Guaranteed the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own, My Bible. You'll want to get one of those real fast. And the Designer Jesus collection no longer need your church's Jesus be a source of social embarrassment. Check out one of the Designer Jesus collection runways at a Designer Jesus fashion show near you. And our new addition to my opening shtick includes this following legal disclaimer. Our guest on today's webcast, insert name here. Good day, Mr. Insert Name here. I think it's Mark Tabladillo. Yes, it is. Has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the Webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials and credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall into the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. This from our lawyers at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. And if you enjoy this webcast, in spite of our satire, in spite of everything else, or if it all really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org and click on the yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Welcome, Dr. Mark Tabladillo.
Dr. Mark, it's good to have you. And now you have been had by the time we're done.
Yes, you will.
I've been had again, and I still keep coming back.
Still keep coming. And, we have more and more with degrees who continue returning, I think maybe to give us the third degree. I'm not really sure, but we're glad to have you. So you are with Ratio Christi now, which is
Did you say Russia? He's with Russia?
Russia. Yeah. Oh, you got nothing to do with the election, did you?
Everything is Russia.
That's right. Well, I'm in Georgia. Right? What happened? Right?
Yeah. I think we have. We think we've been compromised here.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
But anyway, Ratio Christi. So my title, I think when I came on last time, was Regional Director. We've realigned our titles, and I'm now Area Director. Really, it's really equivalent responsibility to what I was doing before. But basically, that is for state of Georgia. And our organization is, of course, it's a nonprofit, and we are a organization of people joining from many different churches who land on the same statement of beliefs, and it's it's a conservative theological statement. And of course, you've had Corey Miller, our president, and other people have been on this show before. So we've represented Ratio Christi in the past. We have two focuses. One is apologetics, and the other one is evangelism. And our focus group is the college campus. And that's anyone on the college campus, including faculty. Some people do have opportunity to reach faculty or involve them in the ministry, and that's great. But our heart and passion is to see, especially this generation of students, that they have equivalent intellectual information from Christianity that they are getting from their schools. And I'm so happy that, at least in Georgia, we have a very active campus at University of Georgia. They've been active throughout the summer, even when school is not so much in session. And rolling into this year, they've resumed their combination of in-person and live meetings, and they've done a bit of street evangelism. And I've gone with them to the city of Athens, Georgia, even this past fall, and stood out there and talked to people on the street of Athens, young people. A lot of them go to school there, some of them don't. And we've had a lot of interesting conversations.
So
it has been observed by some that as you go through the book of Acts, we discover that Paul typically goes to the major cities to establish churches and do his preaching. And the reason being that is where the thought shaping for culture really happened. So he was persuading those who were passing through and who would then take what they were learning to other parts of the world as well as establishing in major metropolises. In a sense, isn't that what is happening at the university level?
Right, and we hope it would happen more. And as we continue to work on what we're doing and let people know what we're doing, they may want to come along and join or affiliate with us, certainly in a part-time basis or even come on full-time as a supported missionary. We have a path for that, for people who want to have that as a career. I work as a volunteer, and I'm very happy in that capacity. But we have several around Ratio Christi who are motivated to make this their full-time mission. And that is what they do.
So Mark, when you say you want to make sure that these college students have equivalent or information regarding Christianity that's equivalent to what they get in their schools, what you mean is you want them to get the other side of the story, right?
Right.
Their college or university is at this point, it seems inevitable that even though you're going to a secular college, which allegedly is trying to be neutral,
even Christian colleges these days,
right?
That's
Even
the problem.
Christian, right? They claim to try to the secular ones, at least you would think, would be making a claim to try to be neutral about religions, but in reality, they're not, are they?
No.
And it's challenging. And you imagine who are the entering faculty? Let's just focus on that. Who are the entering faculty at a lot of these universities? I mean, I got my doctorate at 30. That's probably middle age for younger people getting their doctorate. Some of them are getting their doctorates in their 20s, and then they may become professor at that point. And they may be at a Christian school or at a secular university. And suddenly they got a huge course load, and then they got research expectations and extracurricular things. There's a lot going on to try to stretch on people's times. But Ron, to your point, if they are now tasked with teaching something like history, biology, psychology, and so now they find themselves in those positions. And we're hoping too, and I hope even people who are seeing this webcast, if they're Christian faculty and they want to have an idea of how to be a Christian in the university, we have a perspective on that.
Oh, that's really good. And, statistically, what we do see is that more and more professors at universities are liberals, dramatically higher percentage. And I think it's within the next 5 years, it'll be something like a ratio of about 60-1 liberals versus conservatives. So it really is a mission field to be on the university campus. And the university campus is where the thought shaping of much of culture happens.
Right.
What do I mean by that? Some people are going to go, what are you talking about? Well, who is it that is educating the politicians and attorneys and psychologists and school teachers and basically everyone who's going to be shaping the thoughts of you and your children in a wide variety of venues throughout the course of your life? News media, for example, they all get their worldview, or most of them get their worldview on university campuses. And if the university is largely pagan, which I would say it is, they are going to come out of there a truly convinced pagan. So being able to proclaim the gospel in those settings is really important, because you could change the direction of future generations if more of them come to the faith.
Right. And even from my own personal walk, and with my personal story being someone who God gave a lot of gifts in the intellectual area. And of course, I went to school. I got my master's, my doctorate at top secular universities. I would be remiss if I didn't put that same level of effort into my understanding of Christianity. Yeah. And this is a good segue for our topic today, perspectives, because Don, I don't know if we talked about this in the prep, but Perspectives is a college course. That is how it was designed in the beginning. So and the name of the class is called Perspectives in the World Christian Movement. And there are 2 universities that provide college credit for people who want to take this class. It's offered at many, the class itself is offered at many churches around the U.S. and around the world. And in addition to teach, and I'll talk a little about what the class is, but it's a 15-week class. It was created in the 1970s, and it was created during a time when there was a renewed interest. I think it really came out of the Jesus movement. Out of the 1970s was really the genesis. A lot of people who were involved in that, and I don't want to closely associate it with any one movement or any one person, because there have been many hands that have shaped it over time. But the goal from the beginning was to make a college course. And today, still, someone can take it for either undergraduate or graduate credit at the sponsoring universities.
Now, the title fascinates me, it's particularly the phrase, the World Christian Movement. I don't think this is the first time I've ever heard that term. If I understand correctly, I usually hear it around people connected to missiology.
Correct. And that's... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's like when I think about it, I think, okay, now how does the world Christian movement differ from like Christianity, or does it? Maybe it's just they're trying to come up with another term. I remember the 70s pretty well, and I remember that you had I think there was an organization called the World Christian Liberation Front. I mean, they were borrowing these terms. Obviously, you had the Palestinian Liberation Front, and you had all these other So it's like, why would you call yourself that? Well, because you're trying to. Well, it might be you're just trying to be hip and you're trying to be cutting edge, or maybe you have a point to make. Like, are you trying to say that? When we refer to the World Christian Movement, are we referring to that portion of Christianity that's actually alive and moving? As opposed to the part that's dead and not doing much of anything.
Exactly.
Is that what we're talking about, or are we talking about Christianity in general? I mean,
I know. Ron? Even as you're talking about this, I'm keying in on the word movement. I've been hearing the word movement a lot in the last 3 to 5 years, and of course, I encountered Perspectives a long time before that. And as we tell the story, and you'll see it in the curriculum, the whole course is set up first with a biblical first 5 lessons. There's 5 lessons on biblical. There's 3 lessons on the history of missions. So the first 5 lessons are the entire Bible, Genesis to Revelation, basically cut up and focusing on the missionary activity of God. God as a missionary is the main message of the biblical section. And that's the section that I teach, which is the first 5. And of course, there's 15 weeks. The next 3 are the history of missions. And so that's going to be time 0. You know, there was no year 0, but the whole...
There should have been. There really should have been. That would have solved a lot of problems. We would not have mistakenly thought we were in the 21st century in the year 2000. We still would have had the Y2K problem, but, well, we thought we... Okay. Let's leave that all behind. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, so anyway, we have... So there is a telling of the stories that have happened between that time and today, including stories like Patrick, including stories like what happened with the Vikings when they came to France. And then the key individual that we focus on, the so-called father of modern missions, is William Carey. So he was in England and he went to India, and he was really the one who sparked a renewed and systematic effort to do missionary work. And that history is tracked for a purpose, not that, we're saying any one of these things is perfect, but we're seeing that we saw God's hand in all these people, and they do provide a framework and a context for where we think the future is.
If you're going to cover the Vikings, you're going to offend a lot of people if you don't also cover the Bears and the Packers. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but when I think of the Vikings, of course, these are people who were pagans who started conquering, and did their conquering become a way of they themselves becoming evangelized? Is that
exactly? Exactly.
So sometimes the colonialist gets colonized by the faith. Isn't that interesting? Instead of Christianity can even colonize colonialists, because really, I mean, the Vikings moved in and took over. For a period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are different models throughout the curriculum. One has to do with coming and going. So sometimes our mission might be people come to us. The other type of mission might be we go to them. And a going mission, like what you're talking about, Ron. So the coming mission would be like when Solomon was sought out for his wisdom, because Israel was supposed to be that light and beacon. And guess what? God has not stopped. So even when they went into captivity, still Daniel was a witness to the conquering enemy. And also that happened to Joseph. He was taken into a foreign land. God's mission always continues. That is one thing that we stress in the course.
Isn't it interesting that twice on the British Isles, you had pagans coming in and displacing Christian civilizations? Mm-hmm. You had it first happen with the Anglo-Saxon and Utes and Danes when they invaded. Right after the Romans pulled out, the Celts were evangelized. The church was there. The church actually shrank for a while in the British Isles until another wave of evangelism was sent up to reconvert them, and then the Vikings, several hundred years later, repeat the whole thing all over again. So I don't know to what extent Christianity really shrank under the Vikings, but in both cases you had new peoples moving into this territory that then the territory had to be evangelized again. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. Usually the way secularists present Christianity, it's just like this parasitic force that goes out and conquer. It kind of follows the colonialists, and is just an extension of colonialism. Where here, that's not the way it worked in Britain over the course of about 1,000 years.
Right. And Ron, I'm going to call something out too, as far as secularists. When they refer to medieval times, they'll refer to it as the Dark Ages. Yeah. Right. So Christians, we want to refer to it as the Middle Ages, and we want to understand what was happening during that time, how the Bible was faithfully preserved. And I know, yes, we were not in some sort of Renaissance or some type of culture that went back to Roman and Greek. There's a whole debate on that. There's a lot of themes.
I think you can argue that. I think you can argue that the very early Middle Ages, right after the fall of the West, you could think of it as, and some historians still call it a kind of Dark Ages, the earliest centuries of the Middle Ages. But there was a Renaissance before the Renaissance in the 12th century, 11th and 12th. So they were the Middle Ages were not all a dark age, that's for sure.
Right, and we're not trying to make an attempt to say, oh, let's retell history so it favors Christianity. That's not the effort. At least that's not my personal goal. I am saying, let's study it as it was. Let's have an open mind about what we really think those achievements were.
Yeah.
And I know Don, I think wanted to say.
Well, there's a couple of things I kind of want to interject. One is, because this is a personal view that I have, that it's my conviction that as believers, we are to disciple people into the faith and then disciple them after they are in the faith, which is somewhat different than kind of the current idea that we have from seeker-sensitive, purpose-driven, like the church never had a purpose before Rick Warren. I'm not sure why that was.
At least it couldn't drive with it.
Of trying to figure out ways to make the church not offensive so that unbelievers will be kind of tricked into coming in. I don't find that is spiritually healthy. I don't find it as biblical. I just don't find that. And it seems to me having a missionary mindset says this: the church is to gather as believers primarily to train, equip, pray for, challenge one another, care for one another. Unbelievers should be welcome and see the family atmosphere, so to speak, and be engaged by that. But the missionary effort primarily happens outside the church.
That's true.
Okay, if that's true, which I believe it is, then there comes a question of how do we evangelize in various cultural settings? As you know, I go to the Parliament of World Religions and to New Age fairs where I can hang around with people who think they're channeling angels, or maybe channeling some kind of an angel. Could be a fallen angel, not a.
Yeah, really.
But so I go to that culture and I have to know how they think, how they reason, how they make their decisions. What is it they believe or think they believe, or if they're even informed about what they believe, or if they're just mimicking something they have seen. And so those conversations require some prior knowledge of the culture. Now, how does that fit in with what you're talking about in perspectives? Let's go back to that. From a standpoint of someone who's with Ratio Christi, whose focus is to disciple people into the faith and disciple them after they're in the faith.
Right. And so Ratio Christi is not trying to be a church. And, we see that there's missions and there's ministries, and we work with churches. I was recently in Athens, and we had several people baptized who are members of a local church that are there in, that community, and that's where they need to be plugged in. Right. You need that. And in fact, the goal, what the goal is for perspectives? They might be sending initial missionaries. We do want to work as a team. First of all, we don't believe in solos. Okay, no solos going out there. But in the wisdom of what we want is we want a self-replicating movement. We want not just to start a church in location X, and we may have to be there to help them start it. Some people may give to missions, and that's what a missionary organization is doing right at the beginning. But as you watch it, what you want as even somebody who's donating to something like that, you want that movement to be self-replicating. You want somebody from that community brought up as leadership, and so that church will be there 10, 20, 30 years from now. And that means they will need to have training beyond discipling so that they can disciple. It has to be beyond that. But I go back to this initial thing. I recently asked someone here in the U.S., what are the qualifications for a pastor? And then he starts giving me a list of, I'd love for them to have a master's degree and all these other types of things. And they have to go to this school and that type of thing. And I told him, do you realize around the world, the average pastor probably only has been a Christian maybe 2 years?
Yeah, right.
Maybe.
Right.
Wow.
And we need to track those numbers. We need to understand that even though we live in the United States, if you want to be a mega church pastor in a major city, yes, you do need to have maybe those advanced degrees for what your life mission will be. But around the world, it's different.
Au contraire, Mark.
Okay.
You're going to
Go for it.
Willow Creek
Who are you thinking of?
Willow Creek put out their criteria for the senior pastor they were looking for, and they
No.
clearly stated no theological training required.
No,
Wow.
none, zero.
The new recently? Okay.
I don't know that
about a year ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. And they do have a guy now, and I don't know if he has any training. I think you need to probably have. Well, anyways,
He may have to own a Bible, but he doesn't have to know anything about it, apparently.
well, but you make a good point, Mark. I mean, not only is the average pastor only been a Christian 2 years around the world, but he doesn't really have access to a theological training or seminary. Several years ago, my pastor and a group of Christians went to Africa, and they took a bunch of, I think, either Reformation study Bibles or there's a few different, the Spirit of the Reformation Study Bible, which I use. Sproul came out with the Reformation Study Bible. They took a huge box of these, and they invited all the local pastors to come to seminars that my pastor and some others would teach on what they were hoping would be helpful theological courses. These were just for a few days, right? And they handed out these Bibles, and one of the attendees, a Rwandan Christian man who has a flock of his own, he says, "You mean we get to keep these?"
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And he repeated that several times. Really, are you really saying we get to keep these? He had never had a study Bible. He had virtually nothing. I mean, other than what he would hear over the radio and what he was taught. I mean, it's like we have no idea just how much we have over here and how little people in various places on earth have. Most of the church, in fact.
Right. And so they are resource poor, and we as a culture are poor on our resources.
That's a great thing. That is a great thing.
But we tailor them for, just about every possible need, don't we, Don?
We do now.
Yeah.
And Bibles. I mean, if you're getting engaged with someone on a discussion and something that the Bible teaches, now we even have the possibility that not only do they say they don't agree with the Bible, but they could have a Bible that doesn't agree with what you say.
Right. Well, and we want to make, and so we have a sponsor who's trying to make this easier for people, because we all know that awkward feeling when somebody in a Bible study says, "I wish the Bible didn't have all those verses about hell." And or when you're having couples devotions and your spouse says, "I'm just not comfortable with verses that teach a traditional view of marriage," or when you're sitting in a church and thinking, "Why do all the Bibles I read always have to agree with what conservative pastors are teaching?" Well, that's why we're introducing the My Bible. It's guaranteed to be the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own. We've spent literally minutes creating a way you can have the Bible that's perfect for you. You used to have to go down some dark back alley to get a Bible like this, but not anymore. Just write down all the places where you want to make your Bible more comfortable for you, and then email them to us or enter them into our handy online form. And the results speak for themselves. Yolanda from Portland says, "Now that I have my Bible, I never worry that my white male pastor's sermons might actually be right." Ben from seminary says, "My Bible gave me the confidence I need to drop out of my Hebrew and Greek classes." Renee from Madison says, "Every single one of my anti-capitalist, anti-police, and anti-social protest chants now comes from my Bible." And Buck50 from Brooklyn says, "Since I got my Bible, I have no trouble basing my violent and misogynistic lyrics on scripture." So when someone throws an uncomfortable verse at you, now you can say, "That's not in my Bible," at mybible.cult. So
And there you go.
You're going to run right out and get one of those, I can tell, Mark.
No, I got some space right here on my shelf.
Exactly.
Oh, of course, I don't need very much.
Let's go to perspectives that you're using this then to equip people for reaching other cultures, right?
We are. And Part of the set, let me go to the action plan. Right, we'll go right to the end.
Yeah.
We realize that only a small number of people are going to be called what we call cross-cultural missions. That's where you go to a different culture and travel. And I think the inspiration verse for that comes in the New Testament, where Jesus says, "You're going to be my witnesses, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." And we've taken those four things to try to define where the places are people might be called to. Jerusalem represents your people, your culture, your location. Judea means your culture and another location. Samaria means people in your location that are of a different culture. And then to the ends of the earth, representing people who are different culture in a different location. And while we look to people like Hudson Taylor and William Carey as being those examples of missionaries who are in other places, when we say, to Ron's earlier point, world Christian movement, we're not just thinking about Bible history, we're not just thinking about missionary history, but we're thinking about any way that Christians will engage, especially people with other cultures, even if it might be they never move. They are exactly where they are. And how many times is that in the United States? Going back to the mission of Ratio Christi, some of our volunteers have used Ratio Christi, for example, to reach foreign nationals because they come to the United States to be scholars.
Right.
And the college campus is a great place to meet many people from many world cultures. So that's that modality of come. People come to a location because there's an attraction. So we don't always have to go somewhere to meet someone of a different people group. Sometimes they're coming here. And in the United States, there's a website called Joshua Project, and it's got up-to-date sociological numbers by country. And these are estimates, but in the United States, we estimate there's 300 people groups represented in the United States. You talk to a lot of people. How many different types of people do you think there are in the United States? Well, some people will say one. We're all one people. And some people will say two or three, and they can't come up with more because they don't know. They're completely ignorant of the diversity of even languages and cultures that are represented in the United States.
Right. Yeah. And they're really missing out on a lot as a result of that. I think people are fascinating, which is one of the reasons why I like to go to these other events where you wouldn't normally. I mean, you're not going to have a Buddhist walk into Wonder Lake Bible Church probably very often. We have had one actually, but it's pretty rare. But you can go to the Parliament of World Religions and find them all over the place. And most of them are from the United States that we're running into.
Right. And one thing that makes Christianity different from something like Islam, we are truly a multicultural faith. God designed that. And that is one of the messages from the early time of Genesis, when He didn't make languages to halt progress. He made languages because that's the direction of progress. There's a different way of thinking about what happened there. And then in the very end, Revelation, you read about people worshiping God in their own native tongue. So it's not like we get to heaven and suddenly everybody's speaking, quote unquote, the same language. In the sense of the same message, yes, but not in the sense of the same actual language, because God preserves those cultures into heaven. That's the message. That's where we read in prophecy. That's where we read in history. And so in between, one of the learnings we have is that there are many traditions and customs in so many cultures that are completely in line with Christianity, and we can see God would preserve that. To Ron's point earlier, there are things that come about as traditions that are not biblical, and things like cannibalism and so many other things that are talked about in the class. And
you might want to make that really clear, just in case somebody goes out there and says, should we honor this tradition?
Yeah, no, we really shouldn't honor that particular tradition. No.
Right. And part of this too is the complementary movement to translate the Bible into many native tongues. when we talk about native tongue, those are the languages that young people learned when they were with their parents. As a young person, I'm talking about age 0 to 6. I'm going to use 0 again. Age 0 to 6. And, when you're young and that's your initial emotional impression of life, we want to be able to speak that's called the heart language, somebody's native language. I'm Filipino, and if you go to the Philippines today, English is the business language. And I didn't grow up with a Filipino language, but there are many Filipino languages, and those represent the heart language of where someone came from. And when they can hear the word of God in those heart languages, it does make a difference, and especially if they know that. And so Christians have been among, over the years, one of the ones who are most involved in translating and preserving languages too. Some have never been preserved.
So I was in a discussion with a church. This is 20 years ago now, and the pastor was very concerned that he was having difficulty. It was a seeker-sensitive church, getting people to do evangelism, and he couldn't figure out why. So he had several mission experts come in there at a round table, and they had invited me to participate. And I was listening to them talking about the different levels of evangelism that you just laid out. And they all looked at me at one point and they said, no, what do you think? Why is it difficult? And I said, well, in my opinion, the reason people in this church are not evangelizing is unrelated to that. It is because they're afraid someone's going to ask them a question they can't answer. In other words, the church isn't educating them in what the faith is and how to communicate that to others, whether it's overseas or across the street. And to a person, they all said, no, it isn't that. And so the pastor looked at the secretary and said, okay, do you evangelize? She goes, no. He said, why? She said, because I'm afraid someone's going to ask me a question I can't answer. So what is it that you're doing in this to sort of facilitate that aspect of evangelism?
Right, and that's fair. There is so I'm going to talk about the course. Yep. Going back to this is a college course. So we have a reader, and I know this word doesn't mean anything to the younger generation, but there is something that used to be called a phone book.
No, you are going back.
I think archaeologists have come across a few of these.
We used to use those like as a booster seat sometimes.
And they had a plastic cover, and they were beneath something called a phone booth.
Right. And they were, some of the pages were white and some were yellow, or sometimes the white and yellow ones were separate books. But I have archaeologists poking around in my garage every once in a while. They come across them. Yeah.
All right. So
the reader itself is in 4th edition. They continue to make improvements, and it is a collection of articles that average 5 pages. And then and people don't have to read all the articles. There's different levels of reading. I mentioned this is a college class, and I don't want to scare anybody who's watching today thinking, oh my goodness, I don't want to teach a college class, too intimidating. Most people take it for a certificate. So that means that they will do a certain amount of reading, and then there's weekly lessons that they fill out. And it's just like Q&A, and it goes through the reader, and it tells you what pages to read. So it's very doable. It's not overwhelming if someone has not had a college class before. However, it is a book that I would say, definitely at the college level, and certainly would qualify for graduate level. So if you're a graduate student taking the class, you're going to do more of the reading, you're going to do all the exercises, and you have to produce a paper as part of the class. So it does merit that graduate level credit. But so the reader itself is also something. I was happy to be part of the team that put together the latest version together. And I didn't write any of the articles, but I did write some of the questions and some of the sections. So I'm just focusing on the biblical area. So that is the material that's behind this course. And I'll tell you too, and I'll just tell you a personal story. I had taken this course about 16 years ago, and I told my mom, I said, oh, this is a great course. Now, she's a reader, right? So I mailed her the book, even in advance of her taking the class, and she started reading it. So she was like already 100 pages into the book. And then I informed her, well, you don't have to necessarily read the whole thing. But she says, no, I'm enjoying it. And again, like I said, all the articles average about 5 pages. They really try to get to the point on these articles and, make it like snack sized. And they follow along the lines of those 4 sections.
Now you have a kind of a setup of what some of these courses look like on your computer that you wanted to show.
Yeah, so let me bring that up in the other screen here, and actually what I'm going to show is actually the reader, and let me go to that.
Screen share.
Yeah, show people what the reader is. Let's see if I can. I don't know if I can close this window. Let's see. Hang on while I get the screen set. All right, there we go. All right, now let me, so screen share screen and sharing these with 2 monitors. Let's see. Well, we'll see what comes up. It might, here I get to select. So I'm going to do a screen 2 and click allow, and you should be able to see it now. Is that good?
And we're going to go add to stream. There you go.
There you go. All right, so this is the cover, and initially they would do it as 2 different books. A lot of people are getting it now electronically. So, and I made the electronic jump. I will admit it. If in printed form, the book itself is about 500 pages, and then the study guide though is really what people follow. So this combined book is the 2 sections together. And as you see on the left side, these are the names of the chapters. So these first 5 are the biblical section. The living God is a missionary God. So I'm about to say something. It's a little bit complex, but you have to think about it. We do not have a church of God with a mission in the world. Rather, we have a God of mission with a church in the world. I'm going to say that again. We don't have a church of God with a mission in the world, but rather we have a God of mission with the church in the world. And the rephrasing of the second way has to do with establishing that mission is God's business. That's what he intended before the creation of the world, and that is the business that he's in throughout the entire scripture. And so we don't have to worry about where is the mission. God is on a mission, and the invitation is for us to join it. That is the thrust of the biblical section. And it goes through, some of this has to do with Old Testament. Your kingdom come is beginning to talk about Jesus, how Jesus was bringing in a new kingdom. And then there's a mandate for the nations, like what I had just outlined. It wasn't just about Jews. And by the way, one of the things told in the Old Testament, I love this story, in case some of the viewers did not realize it, there are Gentiles in the lineage of Jesus Christ. If you're an advanced Bible scholar, you could name who those are. I'm not going to name them, but go to the course. Find out what Gentiles are part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. And it's not just...
I'm trying to rattle them off here. I have to think about it. But Ruth and Rahab are the first to come to mind.
Yeah. So the thing is that God made that as an intention from the beginning. It is not an accident. It is by design.
And there was also Adam. You might consider Adam a Gentile, but
yeah, Adam is a Gentile. So anybody who did not come from Israel, technically, is a Gentile. So even Abraham, right?
Noah.
So, yeah, there you go. So this is understanding, what is this history? How does it form one story? And then what I like here, 5 is going to be the end of the biblical section. Then 6, 7, and 8 are going to be the history of missions. And then these are going to deal with events that have happened, between the time of the apostles and then later on. And then down here, it talks about what is remaining, how are they going to hear it? And then some ideas about the goal. And like here, I had alluded to this, spontaneous multiplication of churches. The goal is to have that 2% of the culture reached for Jesus Christ, because it's got to be a certain amount. They have nominally studied it, and they say, once it gets to 2%, then it's got a really fighting chance that movement will grow in that era. And I think, Don, as we talked about in the prep, I don't have up-to-date numbers, but just in the time that I've been with Perspectives, which is 16 years, we've seen a lot of Muslim groups come to faith, and there's some major Muslim movements happening right now. So those who are on the forefront could tell you more about that if people are interested. I'm talking about people who are watching the broadcast.
Now you mentioned that you mentioned this 2% threshold. If I understand you correctly, you're saying once you hit that threshold, the movement has a chance to thrive. The first people group that came to my mind when you said that was the Japanese. Do you know what the percentage is in Japan? Because Christianity has really had a very difficult time thriving or becoming a movement in Japan.
Sure. And let me close this. Sorry, I got some windows popping up. I didn't close this application, so let me close that. Okay, and I'm going to go to the numbers, and I would recommend, there's 2 books that I recommend. One's called Operation World. Yeah. Operation World's a catalog of people groups, and the other one is Joshua Project, and it is a website, and it has up-to-date numbers, and I'll bring it up on the screen just in a second once it comes up in my window. And you can look up any country in the world, and this is continuously updated. I love the graphics. They've continued to invest in this. It's just so beautiful. I'm going to go to Japan, and I'm just hovering over it. I see 36 people groups, and 23 are considered unreached, meaning under that 2% threshold. So it's not just how many people are reached in the country, but it's also realizing what they are. So like here in Japan, 68% Buddhism. So like if somebody wanted to go to Japan, yes, you need to understand Buddhism. Why? It's the dominant, religion. And what's the total population? Population in the unreached. Percent of Christian adherent? See, it's still very low. This is definitely a mission field. Yeah. And I've known people who have been missionaries to Japan.
Me too. Yeah. Now, this is unusual. I mean, you said there are 36 people groups, 23 unreached. Mm-hmm. Japan likes to not think of itself in terms of more than one people group, at least as I understand. I've talked to Japanese missionaries, people who have been to Japan. I've talked to Japanese American Christians, right, who will tell you they're very much into uniformity. They're very much into just emphasizing the Japanese identity. But you're saying there are actually 36 varieties of Japanese people.
And when you go down on the screen, it'll show you who they are. So yes, the predominant is Japanese, 120 million out of what, 123. So that's really predominant. So
you're talking about not different kinds of Japanese. You're talking about different other than Japanese who live in Japan.
Exactly. So there are people here in other groups,
but they're not very
Japanese, Brazilian. I don't know what that is, but they speak Portuguese and they live in Japan.
Wow.
And then there's so many Korean people. And of course, there's a lot of Koreans that are Christian, and that's why it shows us a green.
I think I have an idea why there's a Japanese-Brazilian category, and that is, it's once a lot of Japanese have moved and then returned. It's very hard. It's very hard to reassimilate. It's very hard to be considered Japanese, even if all you did was live abroad. Yeah. It's very difficult to be accepted.
Now, one of the things about each of the people groups, actually religions, is many of them want to attach a Jesus into their schema to somehow give it additional credibility.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that before.
That's true. Well, Islam has got Isa, right?
He does. Now, we have a sponsor that actually addresses that.
Well, yeah, because it even happens in America. I mean, you want to have your own special Jesus. So the question is, do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion-forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways in the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You don't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and of course, Muslim Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting-edge friends and acquaintances. Please observe the attendance requirements, cost of admission, your eternal soul, required attire, semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection, London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City, and a church runway near you. So, don't want to miss it. I mean, you got to check it out just to make sure. You don't want to be embarrassed.
That's right. That's
so
right. So you can design your own Bible and design your own Jesus.
So in our culture, you want your own Jesus to kind of make sure you're hip and trendy. But in other cultures, really, they're trying to find a Jesus that fits into, well, I guess in both cases, it's really the same, fits into their worldview. Here we have a worldview that's very much into what does not get you canceled on Twitter or in social media, whereas over there, it's the ostracism has a different basis, but you're trying to avoid it nonetheless.
Right. So I had someone requested to be a friend on Facebook. It's a woman in Singapore, actually, and in English, she said, call her Emily. And in a little bit of a discussion back and forth on Messenger, she asked, well, what do you mean you're a missionary to cults and non-Christian religions? And so I explained that, and she goes, oh, well, I believe in Christianity and Buddhism, and I'm a god. And so
she said she was a god?
Yeah, she's a god.
Oh, she's a god. Okay.
Yeah. And so, that then gave some interesting conversation, and we could have explained what Christianity is. And she said, well, I guess I'm not a Christian. Well, that's good. At least she understood that part of it.
Got that part down.
Yeah. And then we also engaged in a discussion on reincarnation, because she did assert that reincarnation is true. And so I just posed a helpful question of, is rape then good or a bad thing? Because there really is no good or bad in reincarnation. There is only paying off karmic debt. And so wouldn't it then be beneficial to be raped to pay off karmic debt? And she was not really happy with the response to that either. But it gave us some interesting discussion. Right now she's reading some material we sent her.
Mm-hmm.
So in thinking about different views of Jesus and how your perspective interacts with that, how do you address those kinds of topics?
Right. And Don, I think this goes to your point earlier about discipling. And so we've known, for example, that in Africa, there's been a lot of missionary work over the past 100 years or so. But even as we've already seen, some of those groups have drifted into their own tribal beliefs. Right. And there's this word syncretism that you learned in this course. In the United States, our drift is twofold. One, into secular materialism, and secondly, into neo-Marxism. Those two being the dominant worldviews in America's universities. So those would be our form of syncretism in the United States. But syncretism overseas might mean into Buddhism, into Islam, into some of these other things. And even William Carey, he went to India so many years ago. Today, India remains still predominantly Hindu culture. There's, of course, a Muslim component there on the Western side, but largely, and then there's still Christians. Very devoted in India, and I've known some of them. And so I think no matter where we are, understanding the basics of Christianity, I think even understanding this course, the history of Christianity, where it's done well, where it hasn't done well, we really feel that that's the foundation for building a future. So it's not just a proposal. When you say perspectives on the world Christian movement, it's not just as if a few dozen people got together someday back in the 1970s and said, oh, let's have a Christian movement, and here's what it's going to do. And that was their starting point. No, I think the thing that makes me comfortable about this course is we start with the Bible at the very beginning. And that, by the way, a high view of the Bible, that the events in the Bible described as historical are true. And then also with the history of missions. And again, you're going to get different theological viewpoints in the Perspectives course. There are many types of people in Orthodox Protestantism. And so, I think it's good for people who do want to do this type of work to learn what those varieties are. But it does still have a central message of Jesus Christ and a certain desire to land that message in a people group in a way that respects their culture and their tradition, right. And then they can really be proud to grow that up and, make that a stabilizing force for their community.
And one of the things you were mentioned about syncretism, and you mentioned the university, and then you went overseas where they're doing syncretism, say with Buddhism, but we effectively are doing that in the evangelical church today, including mysticism, Buddhism, and New Ageism through things like the Enneagram, for example, contemplative prayer, and or critical race theory, which is at the university level and in the churches. And many are not equipped to really even discuss these things intelligently. They don't know why that they are biblically suspect, because it isn't being, I think, systematically taught in too many places. I know Ron's church does a better job. My home church does a better job. But then both of those settings have apologists in-house that we're kind of nags about those things.
Yeah.
And for a base understanding, I would say without having necessarily a specific knowledge of something like Enneagram, where I would always point people to is if you have a good understanding of the Bible, you will be in the best shape possible. That is even much more important than the history section. Although I think that's important, I still think the Bible section is centrally important for people who want to succeed.
Well, it really is. If you don't start with the Bible portion, if you don't know who God is and how God interacts with his creation, then you can invent anything that you want to invent, right? Because you have no base for that. I just had to write a review on a book coming out about Norman Geisler, and sort of central to what Norman Geisler has done apologetically was a defense of the God who was there and who was speaking. That we know who God is. We're not left wondering, and as Ron and I keep coming back to this thing, even though we are theologically in different camps, and I don't even know where you're at because we never really asked. It was unimportant because we focus on the essentials of the faith. Even though we're in different camps, we still come to this same starting point, is that sola scriptura is what we need. It is what is essential for faith and practice. It speaks to the main issues. It may not tell us how to add 2 + 2, but it tells us why those kinds of things are important through Scripture and meaningful, right? So we are going to do something, just so you're aware of this, Mark. Ron has also another little bit of an obligation. So we are going to do something a little unusual we started last week, and that is we're going to run end credits and then have an after the show for you and I to pursue a couple of these other issues.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to hang out for a minute or two, but I'll be boogieing on after I do this at some point. Okay, let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our regular cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Justin Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor, Yole Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Donna Piece of Me. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never.
Never. Well,
So
keep on
for those who are watching, Mark Tabladillo is our guest. He's with Ratio Christi. In the description at the bottom, you can click on that and go to Ratio Christi and find out all about them. If you want to contact him indirectly, you can email me and I will put you in contact with him after that. How's that, Mark?
Sounds great.
So this is the after the show.
This is the After the Show show. Welcome to the After the Show show, or as someone pointed out, Calvary Chapel has Afterglow. I don't like.
I don't think we're going to go with that one now. I think we'll just exclude that at the outset.
All right, so back to perspectives. You've kind of laid out. Okay, here's what it is. Here's what the intent is. There's 15 lessons involved with it, or 15 weeks.
15 weeks. Aligned to 15 lessons.
And any church can make use of it. Now, is this something they would have to learn how to teach, or does it come with a pre-programmed teacher?
Okay, so there's different roles, and I'll outline what they are. There's a core national staff who supports Perspectives full time, and it's supported by the organization known as Frontier Ventures. Now, Frontier Ventures has its own, thrust about what it does. So Perspectives is a separate entity, and it's really their caretaking Perspectives. So, as part of sponsoring a course, you do need to have a facilitator. So, let's say a new church, and I will be speaking at least one new church in January. When I say new church, I mean a new church host. So this is a church that may have been there for a while, but this is the first time they're doing the class. Someone will have to have taken the class and then take their facilitator training. It's a little bit challenging to facilitate a class if you've never done something like this before. I've done it myself one time. So I was trained to do it, and the only reason I didn't do it more was I didn't have enough support from my church, ironically. But it just was a mismatch in timing. Nevertheless, the idea is that the classes themselves typically will have 35 or more attendees. You have to have a certain number of attendees. It is a paid course. I didn't mention that earlier. What you get for the payments, you get the materials, and also that pays for a grader. That's a separate thing. So there's going to be a grader that will read the assignments. It's a nominal fee that goes to these different people. And then they also have a certain amount of expenses associated with a class, including sponsoring different speakers to come in each week. So if you think about the facilitator is really being the one who's there every week and guiding the discussion, and also the facilitator chooses who gets invited to teach each of the 15 sections. I've had, for example, in recent memory, some who've chosen me because they're very interested in apologetics and said, Mark, of this list I had to choose from, you're the only one that had apologetics, so right. I wanted to make sure you're here. So it's really a facilitator that sets the tone for who gets invited, and they are able to read an individual's denominational background, history, and that type of thing, or even call them and contact them. I think usually there's enough on the bio that they would know, what type of instructors they would have available. The instructors themselves, again, they have to have had taken the class. And I think as far as of instructor training, I don't remember what was there because it's too long ago. For me, it was over 10 years when I started. So, but there is a formality of process. And even for the last part in the professor of record is another role. That person has to have a certain degree accreditation to be the one who will grade the college assignments, should there be a college student. Now, because I have a doctorate. Okay, well, I think Ron's saying goodbye.
Hey, guys.
Say goodbye. Bye, Ron.
All right. So those are some of the roles. And as far as the facilities are usually provided or sponsored by the church, or, host church will sponsor that. And a lot of times they will draw on the alumni list locally to organize the class. So there's different roles in organizing. So there's usually a team. I had a team of like 8 people doing different things. So it's
cool.
doesn't all fall on one person.
Okay. So it looks like you have another screen share set up for something.
No.
Oh,
Let's see. I'll stop sharing that. I was showing that earlier for the
I got you.
Joshua project. We were talking about that.
Oh, okay. Joshua projects. That's interesting. So, okay. So that's perspectives. If anyone wants to contact you regarding that, they can email me or they can go to Rochelle Christie and they can get a message to you in some way to facilitate that. Yeah, as Rochelle Christie is, I love the ministry. It's sort of an outgrowth of Southern Evangelical Seminary, and I have a tie back there as well through my friend, the late Norm Geisler. It's exciting to see how that ministry is impacting so much of Christianity. You know, apologetics. You may recall there was a day when you just had a sort of a handful of apologists out there, and we all really knew each other. And in recent years, in the last maybe 6 or 7 years, there's been literally an explosion of young, upcoming apologetics ministries, and it's exciting to see. And yet, I can't keep up with everybody.
No. No, and they all have their own. They're doing YouTube. They're doing blogging. They're writing books. They're getting doctorates. They're teaching in universities. And it was not that long ago, and in the scope certainly of probably our both lifetimes, when the number of apologetics books available was very limited that were just on that topic. Now, of course, the material itself, as we claim, was always there. It was always in the Bible. It was always in the ancient fathers, but it wasn't packaged in the way that it is now.
Right. Okay, so we just got 1 or 2 minutes left before we do close out for the day. What things would you want to say to those who are viewing as to why they should think about perspectives, perhaps for their church? And I do want to say something before we do that, because someone had contacted me. They're a little concerned about some of the theology of frontier missions. And you and I discussed this at length, and your point was, whatever that may be, it isn't inherent within perspectives, because that's being taught by people from a variety of denominational and theological views, correct?
Right, it is. And, we see that same type of denominational variety, certainly here, MCO, right? You and Ron, and then even in Ratio Christi. So when I decided some time ago where I would throw my energy, it was going to be with groups I considered orthodox in small o, in following a high view of the Bible and a traditional view of Christianity. And there may be some around, and I've heard people in Ratio Christi have occasionally had viewpoints that I thought, no, I don't agree with that, and we have a conversation. But that will happen in life, and that happens in the mission field, and that happens in perspectives. By and large, my experience has been that I have not had to compromise or hide what I believe to be true as an instructor or as an attendee, although very aware that I may be sitting in a class or listening to an instructor who may have a viewpoint on a topic that I don't necessarily agree with their perspective. And that's why they call it perspectives. There are different viewpoints here, and at least we are calling light to the central ones that we think are important. I think overall, again, going back to the book, I feel the book has a high view of the Bible and a high value of Scripture, however one would want to interpret that. And the classes themselves, if you go to perspectives.org, they will show where they are starting in January. They run them on a semester basis. So the new semester is going to be starting in January, and one can look to see if there is a class in their local area.
Okay. So that's that. Now, Ratio Christi, which is, perhaps more important to me at this juncture. If somebody has a college student going off to university, for example, how would they tie in? Or secondly, if they're going, I perhaps want to get involved with this either as a volunteer, part-time, or perhaps even a missionary, with Ratio Christi, what qualifications do I need to have, and what is the process to get engaged?
Right. So there's different types of people we encounter. Sometimes we encounter students who are going to maybe a secular university and want to know if there's a Ratio Christi chapter there. They can go to our website and find out if there is. Sometimes they're a motivated student who might want to be that president or lead a group, and we will help the young person know how to do that. So don't feel like, for an entering college student, that might be a bit intimidating to say, oh, I'm going to be a president of a college club or something like that. And we have young men and young women in leadership, so don't let gender be a barrier. But we have leaders in our different areas, and we are thinking about the students. Parents, we want to hear from parents. If you have a young person that is going to a school and they want to connect with Ratio Christi, we certainly love to talk to them. In a school like we have here in Georgia, a lot of campuses will have multiple campus ministries. And to be fair, God may want that person plugged in another place. Okay, we're not saying this is the be-all, end-all for any student that would come to a particular college campus. So we want them to make the wisest decision that the Holy Spirit's calling them to. And then for volunteers such as myself, yes, there's a formal process as far as being trained to lead the ministry. We would certainly want, and even for our officers in our clubs, we want them to adhere to our statement of beliefs. And they are on our website. And in addition to that, our leaders have to have a certain amount of training. And again, it goes back to the training component. Now, we don't have a formal curriculum for Ratio Christi. What we do have is a generic understanding of what is available. And there are certain courses we can recommend, which would qualify. Short of a master's degree, which typically will qualify, a master's degree in apologetics from a school that we know would qualify. But certainly on a personal level, it's not just a degree, or a degree from a university. Still, the person needs to be convicted on what we're trying to accomplish. You can't just say, oh, I have this degree, I automatically qualify. That's not how it goes. It goes with the person's heart and God's calling. And then also instructors. We're very interested in instructors. So those who are in Christianity, and if you are teaching at your church, or if you've got a message that you think would be interesting to our students, feel free to contact the chapter director that's in your area. A lot of our chapters now are online. So there's even a possibility to teach at schools that are not in your geographic vicinity. And I've done that recently. Okay. And Don, I hope you do that too more. We'll have to talk about that.
Well, yeah, we should talk about that. I was unaware that they were even open to that sort of thing. So yeah let's talk about that. Yeah, very good. All right, so Mark Tabladillo, thank you for being with us. Hang on, we're going to sign off here. We've already done our end credits, so everyone else, we will see you all next week. Thank you for joining us on the Unknown Webcast.